This is Eric Siegel, co-founder and CEO of Gooder AI, and in this video, I'm going to demo the Gooder AI chatbot for fraud detection. The bot serves as a thought partner and co-pilot for predictive AI projects in general, and helps business stakeholders understand everything. So we're looking at the savings curves, comparing three models for managing payment card fraud, but the chatbot will explain everything. By the way, we're adding the AI voice just to this demo video. The product doesn't have narration yet. So I right click and select Ask Gooder Chatbot.
The chart displays the projected savings for three different machine learning models: Decision Tree 1, Decision Tree 2, and Logistic, across varying percentages of transactions blocked. The savings curves show that initially blocking a small percentage of transactions results in positive savings. But as more transactions are blocked, the savings eventually become negative due to the costs of incorrectly blocking legitimate transactions. The Decision Tree 1 model appears to provide the highest potential savings compared to the other two models.
All right, I run fraud detection at a medium-sized bank, and my data scientist made these models. What is this view telling me, and what is the purpose of Gooder AI?
This view from Gooder AI provides a business-centric evaluation of the machine learning models for fraud detection. It translates the model performance into projected monetary savings, allowing you to assess the business value rather than just technical metrics. The purpose is to help you determine the optimal deployment strategy by visualizing the trade-offs between savings and the percentage of transactions blocked. This bridges the gap between data science and business impact, enabling you to make an informed decision on which model to deploy and at what decision threshold to maximize savings while balancing other business considerations like customer experience.
All right, so what do you suggest that I, as the project stakeholder, do?
As the project stakeholder, I would suggest using this visualization to carefully evaluate the trade-offs between savings and customer impact for each model. Identify the decision threshold that maximizes savings, while keeping the percentage of legitimate transactions blocked at an acceptable level for your bank's risk tolerance and customer experience goals. The Decision Tree 1 model appears most promising based on its higher maximum savings potential, but also consider the average savings and shape of the curve. Ultimately, select the model and threshold that best aligns with your bank's priorities around fraud prevention, cost savings, and customer satisfaction. Gooder AI provides this valuable business context to guide your strategic deployment decision.
Okay, well, we're going to block at most just a few percent of attempted transactions. So let's zoom in and see what it has to say about that. Does this help see any further insights?
This zoomed-in view provides more granular insights into the savings curves for lower percentages of transactions blocked. A few key observations. The Decision Tree 1 model has the highest maximum potential savings of around $88 million at blocking around 3.8% of transactions. This is the optimal operating point for maximizing savings with this model. The Decision Tree 2 model peaks at a lower maximum savings of around $76 million at 3.2% transactions blocked. Its curve is slightly flatter than Decision Tree 1. The Logistic model has a much lower maximum savings potential of only around $16 million at 1.3% transactions blocked. Its curve also turns negative at a lower percentage blocked compared to the tree models. In the very narrow 0 to 1% range, the Logistic model initially outperforms the tree models in savings before being overtaken. This granular view allows you to hone in on the ideal decision threshold percentage for each model to maximize savings, while limiting the volume of transactions blocked to an acceptable level for your risk tolerance. The Decision Tree 1 model emerges as the frontrunner based on these savings projections.
All right, so let's go to that exact maximal point, go to max value from right-clicking here, and then ask about that. Why is this the best threshold for peak savings?
The 3.83% decision threshold for the Decision Tree 1 model represents the peak savings of $88,068,547 because it strikes the optimal balance between blocking enough fraudulent transactions to maximize fraud prevention savings while minimizing the costs of incorrectly blocking legitimate transactions. At lower decision thresholds, too few fraudulent transactions are blocked, leaving significant fraud losses on the table. At higher thresholds, the savings start declining as the costs of incorrectly blocking legitimate transactions outweigh the fraud prevention benefits. The shape of the decision tree 1 curve shows that 3.83% is the sweet spot, where the marginal gains from blocking more fraudulent transactions are maximized relative to the increasing marginal costs of false positives. This specific threshold leverages the model's discriminative power most effectively to generate peak monetary savings according to the provided cost parameters. So in summary, this threshold represents the point of maximum net savings after accounting for both fraud losses prevented and operational costs of incorrectly blocking valid transactions. The visual analytics from Gooder AI allow identifying and quantifying this optimal deployment point.
All right, let's ask about these two settings here. What are the sliders for?
The sliders in the Gooder AI interface allow you to adjust the parameter settings that feed into the savings calculations behind the curves displayed on the chart. Specifically, the sliders control cost of wrongly blocking a legitimate transaction, cost of undetected fraud, letting a fraudulent transaction through, population size the model would be deployed over. By moving these sliders, you can update the parameter values to reflect your bank's unique situation and priorities. The savings curves will then update in real time to show how the projected savings change based on the new parameter settings. This interactive capability is powerful because it allows you to easily explore what-if scenarios and understand how changes to the cost assumptions or deployment population impact the potential savings and optimal decision thresholds for the models. Rather than using static estimates, the sliders put you in the driver's seat to customize the analysis to your specific business context. This facilitates making a more informed, data-driven decision on model deployment aligned with your bank's fraud risk posture and operational constraints.
All right, let's change this one. The cost of wrongly blocking a transaction down from $100 to, let's say, $50. And then let's ask about that. If we offered a small gift card, let's say, to each wrongly blocked cardholder, do you think we could get the cost down this far?
Offering a small gift card to customers whose legitimate transactions are wrongly blocked could potentially help mitigate the cost associated with those false positives. However, it's difficult to definitively say whether a gift card approach would reduce the cost down to the $50 level specified in the updated parameters without more details on the expected volume of false positives at different decision thresholds, the anticipated cost of the gift cards, operational costs of administering the gift card program. If the gift cards are relatively inexpensive, e.g. $5 to $10, and the false positive volumes are manageable, then it's conceivable that a well-executed gift card program could bring the effective cost of wrongly blocking down closer to $50 per incident. However, if the false positive volumes are very high or the gift card values need to be more substantial to placate customers, then the cost could quickly escalate beyond $50 per block transaction. Additionally, there may be non-monetary costs like customer frustration that a simple gift card may not fully address. So in summary, a thoughtful gift card approach is worth considering, but its viability depends on your specific operational realities around false positive volumes and the cost of implementing such a program effectively. The Gooder AI analysis with the updated $50 parameter at least allows modeling that scenario.
All right, and let's change the other one, the cost of undetected fraud. And let's say we thought, oh, maybe it's going up. We had some reason to think it might go up, or I just want to see what would happen if we did that. Let's ask about that. I just changed another parameter. What effect did that have? And what could you imagine would warrant that particular change?
The change you made was increasing the cost of undetected fraud from $500 to $575. This increase in the penalty for letting fraudulent transactions through has caused the overall savings curves for all three models to shift upwards. A higher cost assigned to undetected fraud events means that successfully blocking those fraudulent transactions becomes more valuable from a savings perspective. So the benefit of deploying the models at higher decision thresholds to catch more fraud is now greater relative to the cost of false positives. You may have increased this parameter if your bank has experienced higher than anticipated losses from undetected fraud recently. Raising the fraud cost parameter allows modeling a scenario where preventing those fraud losses is prioritized more heavily in the cost-benefit analysis. Alternatively, you could be stress testing the models to see how resilient the potential savings remain if fraud losses escalate in the future due to emerging threats or economic conditions. Adjusting this key parameter provides that what-if capability. Either way, by increasing the undetected fraud cost input, you are effectively telling the system to place more emphasis on the fraud prevention aspects of the models during the valuation analysis. This results in the savings curve shifting upwards to reflect the higher savings potential from minimizing fraud at given decision thresholds.
All right, let's take a step back and ask a more fundamental question about this chart. How is savings, the y-coordinate, calculated?
The savings is calculated as the reduction in overall cost or losses compared to taking no action at all, not deploying any fraud detection model. Specifically, the calculation works like this. Calculate the total cost if no fraud model is deployed. Total cost, no model, equals number of fraudulent transactions times cost of undetected fraud. Calculate the total cost after deploying the fraud detection model at a given decision threshold. Total cost with model equals number of fraudulent transactions missed times cost of undetected fraud plus number of legitimate transactions blocked times cost of wrongly blocking. The savings is then savings equals total cost, no model, minus total cost with model. So in essence, it's finding the cost reduction from successfully blocking fraudulent transactions using the model, while subtracting the costs incurred from any legitimate transactions that get incorrectly blocked. The costs of undetected fraud and wrongly blocking legitimate transactions are the parameters you can adjust using the sliders. Changing these costs will shift the overall savings curves up or down accordingly. The number of transactions, fraudulent, legitimate, blocked, etc., at each decision threshold percentage is determined from the test dataset the models were evaluated on. So in summary, savings represents the net monetary benefit achieved by deploying the fraud detection model compared to not using any model at all, based on the provided cost parameters.
All right, that sounds like a fine way to estimate the potential savings, but might there be a more precise way to forecast savings, since big fraud matters more than little fraud?
You make a good point. The savings calculation we discussed assumes that all fraudulent transactions incur the same flat cost of undetected fraud, regardless of the transaction amount. However, in reality, the financial impact of a fraudulent transaction is likely proportional to the dollar value of that transaction. A more precise way to forecast savings would be to take into account the actual dollar amounts of the individual fraudulent and legitimate transactions in the test dataset. This would allow weighing the savings from blocking high-dollar fraudulent transactions more heavily. Here's how a more granular savings calculation could work. For each transaction in the test dataset, determine if it is truly fraudulent or legitimate based on the labels. For fraudulent transactions that the model correctly identifies, true positives, calculate the savings as the full dollar amount of that transaction. For legitimate transactions that the model incorrectly blocks, false positives, calculate the cost as the flat cost of wrongly blocking parameter. Sum the savings from step 2 and subtract the cost from step 3 to get the total net savings. This transaction-level calculation would provide a more accurate savings forecast compared to using simple counts and flat costs. Blocking a $10,000 fraudulent transaction is far more impactful than a $100 fraud. The downside is this more granular approach requires having the full transaction amount data for the test dataset, rather than just labels. But it would absolutely give a more precise estimate of real-world savings if that data is available.
All right, so let's say that I, as a stakeholder, I'm a little lost. I want to circle back and get to some of the fundamentals. I'm trying to understand, why wouldn't I save twice as much by blocking twice as many transactions?
The reason you wouldn't save twice as much by blocking twice as many transactions is because of the increasing costs associated with incorrectly blocking legitimate transactions as the decision threshold gets higher. The savings curves we see have an inverted U-shape because at lower decision thresholds, the savings increase as more fraudulent transactions are correctly blocked. However, beyond a certain point, the costs of incorrectly blocking legitimate transactions start outweighing the fraud prevention benefits. Specifically, if you doubled the percentage of transactions blocked from, say, 4% to 8%, you would incur much higher costs of wrongly blocking legitimate transactions. These costs, multiplied by the larger volume of false positives at 8%, could completely offset or even exceed the additional fraud prevention savings. The savings calculation has two opposing components. Savings from blocking fraudulent transactions. Cost from blocking legitimate transactions. Doubling the decision threshold doesn't double just the first component. It also increases the second component costs at a faster rate due to lower model precision at higher thresholds. So while more aggressive blocking catches more fraud, it comes with steeply rising false positive costs that quickly eat into the incremental savings. This trade-off is why the savings curves peak and then decline. At some point, the indiscriminate blocking costs outweigh what's recovered from fraud prevention alone. Finding that optimal balance is the key benefit of the Gooder AI analysis.
Yes, indeed, those diminishing returns are the nature of predictive projects and the reason to create these visuals. So let's ask one final question. Explain why the curves go up and then down so that a child would understand with a story about preventing bullying.
Sure, let me explain why the curves go up and then down using a story about preventing bullying that even a child can understand. Imagine there's a school playground where some kids are bullies who pick on other kids. The principal wants to stop the bullying, but doesn't want to punish kids who aren't actually bullies by mistake. The principal hires a bully detector, someone who can spot the bullies based on how they behave and what they say. The more bullies the bully detector catches, the safer the playground becomes and the more savings, less kids getting bullied, there will be. At first, when the bully detector starts catching just a few obvious bullies, the savings, fewer bullied kids, goes up quickly. So the curve climbs upwards. But as the bully detector tries to catch more and more bullies, they start accusing some kids of bullying even though those kids actually weren't bullies at all. These are false positives, good kids getting punished by mistake. Each time a good kid gets punished for bullying they didn't do, it costs the principal. They have to apologize, make it up to that kid and their parents, and deal with the trouble it causes. At some point, the cost of punishing good kids by mistake becomes so high that it wipes out the savings from catching real bullies. This is why the curve starts going down again after a while. The principal has to find the perfect spot on the curve where enough bullies are caught to keep the playground safe. But not so many that they're punishing too many good kids and causing a bunch of other problems. Does this playground bully story help explain why the savings curves go up at first, but then come down again if you try to block too many transactions, kids? Let me know if you need any part clarified.
All right, that's it for now. If you found this interesting, hit like and subscribe. Reach out to us with any questions or if you'd like to give Gooder a spin on your predictive AI projects. Or feel free to ask any questions in the YouTube comments and we'll answer them. For a more detailed overview and demos on a few other models, follow the links in the description of this video.